Good evening, everyone. This is Robin Connolly from the Greater Toronto Airports Authority. It's 6 p.m. now. We'll just give folks a couple more minutes to join and then we'll get started. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Why don't we get started? Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, my name is Robin Connolly, and I am the Director of Sustainability and Social Impact for the Greater Toronto Airports Authority. I'm turning on my camera, actually, sorry. And I am the co-chair of the Pearson Public Meeting. I would also like to acknowledge my co-chair, Michael Belanger, Director of Aviation Safety, Regulation and Performance, who is also here this evening. Thank you all for joining us. I wish to start by acknowledging that the land on which the airport sits is part of the treaty lands of the territory of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nations. We are thankful to be welcomed on these lands in friendship. We understand and appreciate their connection as original caretakers of this land and offer this acknowledgement respectfully and in appreciation for all Indigenous peoples who cared for and continue to care for the land. And we acknowledge that we share in that responsibility for stewardship of these lands. So this evening you have joined us for our final 2021 Pearson Public Meeting, which are part of the airport's noise management forums. These meetings provide residents with a chance to learn more about airport operations and how your area is impacted, to hear updates from the Greater Toronto Airports Authority and our partners NAV Canada about noise management efforts, and to ask questions or raise concerns related to airport operations. Each meeting starts with a drop-in style session where residents can ask questions about the operations one-on-one, and that was just prior to this meeting. And then this is the public meeting session, which includes presentations from us and then a public question period. Before I share an overview of the agenda for this evening, I would like to let you know that this meeting is being supported by representatives from the Greater Toronto Airports Authority and NAV Canada. My colleagues will introduce themselves as they present during the evening, during this evening's meeting. Apologies. A couple more housekeeping items before we move on to the agenda. I would like to remind folks that this evening's meeting is being recorded and will be made available along with the presentation on our website. I ask that all those attending put their mics on mute and their cameras on off. We will pause at the end of each section for questions. Feel free to use the raise your hand function or to type your question in the chat to help you remember, and we'll pause along the way. And as a resident, if you do have a question, when you speak, we just ask that you introduce yourselves, just your name, your first name, and the closest intersection. This will help us understand the operations overhead to answer your questions. And now on to the agenda. Next slide, please. Hi, someone who's joined us, I'm just going to ask you to go on mute as we're able to hear you. If you don't mind, thank you. This is just an overview of the noise management roles and responsibilities. The Greater Toronto Airports Authority is a not-for-profit business, and we manage and operate Toronto Pearson Airport. NAV Canada is the air navigation service provider in Canada and responsible for the safe and efficient movement of aircraft and the designing of airspace. Excuse me. The airlines also have a role in the noise management responsibilities, and they must operate in accordance with Transport Canada regulations and the GTA's own noise abatement procedures and noise operating restrictions. And Transport Canada is also a player in the noise management ecosystem and the regulator for aviation in Canada. Next slide, please. Next slide. So great, thank you. Just a little overview about the GTA before we get started. In just a pre and post COVID snapshot to give you some context. In 2019, we had 50.5 million passengers, and in 2020, we concluded with 13.3 million, with the first 10 million, in fact, happening in the first quarter of 2020. Movements in 2019 were just above 450,000, while in 2020 we finished out at just almost 175,000, and saw over 500,000 tons of cargo in 2019, which was down to 388,000 tons in 2020. So this is just some quick stats to give you a snapshot of operations at Toronto Pearson. And just, building off of what I mentioned earlier in terms of the players for noise management, at Toronto Pearson, we have an environmental management system, which focuses on 7 areas, ranging from climate change resiliency, strategic energy use and natural environment, and of course also includes noise management. And you are joining us here this evening to learn about our noise management efforts. And every 5 years we have a rolling noise management action plan, which is our blueprint for how we review our noise management program and introduce new programs and initiatives. And so that will be a cornerstone of our updates here this evening. So just to give you that context for how Toronto Pearson manages impacts. Next slide, please. And so now our agenda. So this evening, we will start with an airport overview of operations in overflown communities. This is just a chance to give you like an Airport 101 so you can understand how the airport operates and situate where you live in terms of those operations. Followed by that, we will be joined by our colleagues from NAV Canada, who will give an update on an ongoing public consultation that is in fact happening right now. And then the GTAA will give an update on our noise management program and our noise management action plan, as well as an airside maintenance update. So once we've concluded that, then we open the floor to you for questions and clarification. So after, as I mentioned, after each section, we will also stop for questions related to that section, but then ask that you hold your questions specifically about operations or that aren't related to any of these matters until the end of the evening. And so with that, I will hand it over to my colleagues to give the airport update.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Ryan Lees. I'm a specialist in the Air Traffic Management and Noise Performance Group at the GTAA. So as Robin mentioned, I'll just be giving a quick update on Toronto Pearson, the current situation with our operations, and a bit of an Airport 101 briefing to get everyone up to speed on some of the basics of our operations. So Toronto Pearson is a massive airport. It's one of the biggest in the world. And prior to COVID-19 happening in 2019, 50 million passengers passed through our terminals and almost 500,000 flights operated to and from the airport. And facilitating all of that activity, of course, takes a huge number of people, and almost 50,000 people were employed at the airport in 2019. Now, obviously, COVID has had huge impacts on the airport and on these numbers, but we do hope to be back to numbers like these as soon as we can. And as you'll see shortly, we've started to see some initial recovery in our passenger numbers and in our flight volumes due to some of the recent travel restrictions that have been lifted. So Toronto Pearson, it is open 24 hours a day, every day of the year. And each operating day is split into 2 parts. So the first part of the day is what we call our normal operating hours, which run from 6:30 a.m. to 12:30 a.m. And then we have what we call our restricted hours, which run from 12:30 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. And the main difference is that during the restricted hours, far less aircraft are allowed to operate. And that's to try and minimize the noise impact that aircraft operations have on surrounding communities during the nighttime hours when people are sleeping. Next slide, please. So I'd like to talk a little bit about our runways and our runway operations. So Pearson has 5 runways, 3 east-west runways and 2 north-south runways. And each of these 5 physical runways can be used from either end, meaning that there's actually 10 operational runway ends that an aircraft can use to land or depart from the airport. So that's why each of the 5 runways listed here has 2 numbers on them. And if we go to the next slide, we can see a graphic of the runways with the numbers added onto them. So you can see here the 5 physical runways, each with a number at each end. And the way that these numbers are determined is that they're based on the direction in degrees that the runways point towards. So if you imagine a giant compass around the airport, runway 33, for example, would point towards 330 degrees on that compass. Runway 15 would point towards 150 degrees, and so on. It's worth noting that we refer to these runways as our east-west and north-south runways. And as you can see from the map here, the runways don't point directly east-west or north-south, but they're pretty close to those directions. So again, we refer to them as our east-west and our north-south runways for simplicity's sake. And then finally, you may be wondering why the runways actually point in these directions. And it's not just random. The directions were quite carefully chosen. Aircraft, they have to land and depart into the wind. So runways are built to be oriented towards prevailing winds here in the GTA. And prevailing winds here in the GTA come from the west and the east. And so therefore, most of the time, aircraft will be approaching or departing our airport from the west or the east. And so there's those 3 east-west runways there to accommodate that demand. But even though the winds are typically from the east and the west, there are times where they'll go north-south. And so again, because aircraft need to land and depart into the wind, we do have those 2 north-south runways there to support that demand when that happens. So moving on. In order to get the arriving and departing aircraft to and from our runways, NAV Canada publishes many detailed and complex arrival and departure procedures that help these aircraft move safely and efficiently through Toronto airspace. So I won't go into too much detail about these procedures, but there is one related concept that I want to touch on, and that's what's called the runway circuit pattern. So when aircraft enter into Toronto airspace, they come from all different directions, and it's the job of the air traffic controllers at NAV Canada to take all of these aircraft coming from the different directions and put them in a sequenced line lined up with the runway safely separated to land. And the runway circuit pattern is the procedure that pilots and air traffic controllers use to achieve that here in Toronto. On top of that, it's also a pattern that gives pilots a very structured flight path and the time necessary to safely descend down to the ground. And the runway circuit pattern is broken up into 3 parts, and those 3 parts are called the downwind, the base leg, and the final approach. So as you can see on the diagram here, the downwind is where the aircraft are put in a line parallel to the landing runway, but in the opposite direction of landing. The aircraft will then make a turn towards the runway onto what's called the base leg. And then from the base leg, that aircraft will make one final turn onto final approach. And final approach is where that aircraft is lined up with the runway and making their final descent down to the ground to land. And the part of the, sorry, if we go to the next slide, the part of the circuit that I'd like to highlight is the base leg. And you can see from the diagram here that the downwind and the final approach sections are quite concentrated. And that's because aircraft on these legs need to be sequenced in a line and spaced very precisely apart from one another. Whereas the base legs, you can see, are more dispersed. And the reason for that is because just like in all other areas of the airspace, aircraft that are being sequenced onto the final approach need to be kept safely separated from each other. And so the location of where these base turns need to occur is going to change and has to be strategically timed based on where the other aircraft on final approach are. And so that's naturally going to result in some variance on the location of those base turns. So when traffic levels are high and the final approach fills up, these base turn locations will expand. And when traffic levels are low and the final approach is clear, these base turn locations will contract. And this expanding and contracting of the base turns is what creates that dispersion in the flight tracks. So coming up here, I have a set of slides that has some pictures of actual flight tracks, and you'll be able to see this base turn and runway circuit pattern very clearly on these slides. So the next set of slides, we like to go through these slides just to give everybody a good idea of what operations off of each runway look like, and to give everyone on the call an idea of which communities are primarily overflown based on which runways and which operations are operating on those runways. So to start out with, we have arrivals on runway 23, which is this slide here. And then the next slide, we have runways to to departures off of runway 05. And the primary communities that would be overflown here would be Maple Vaughan, Richmond Hill, Thornhill, and Rexdale. So again, you can see arrivals on runway 23 on the slide here. And if we flip to the next slide, we'll see departures off of runway 5. Perfect. So runways off of runway, or excuse me, I keep saying runways, departures off runway 5. Moving on, we'll take a look at arrivals to runway 24 left and right, and departures off of runway 6 left and right. And the primary communities overflown here would be Midtown Toronto, North York, Weston, and Markham. So we'll start out with the flight tracks for arrivals to runways 24 left and 24 right. And then flipping over to departures off of runways 6 left and 6 right. Perfect. Moving along, we'll now take a look at arrivals onto runway 5 and departures off of runway 23. And primary communities overflown on these operations would be Brampton, Georgetown, Milton, Meadowvale, and Streetsville. So first we'll look at arrivals off runway to runway 5. And then departures off of runway 23. Perfect. And then finally for our east-west flows, we have arrivals to runway 6 left and 6 right, and departures off runways 24 left, 24 right. Perfect. And yeah, primary communities overflown here would be Meadowvale, Alderwood, Erin Mills, Streetsville, Clarkson, Port Credit, and Oakville. So again, we'll start with the arrivals. So arrivals to runway 6 left and 6 right. And then departures off of runways 24 left and 24 right. Perfect. And then we'll move on to our north-south runways. So first off, arrivals to runway 15 left, 15 right, and departures off of runways 33 left and 33 right, which primarily overfly Brampton and Malton. So we have some flight tracks for arrivals to 15 left, 15 right, and then departures off of 33 left, 33 right. And then last but not least, we'll take a look at arrivals to 33 left and right and departures off of 15 left and right, mainly overflying Etobicoke Lakeshore, Alderwood, Long Branch, and Markland Wood. So arrivals to runways 33 left and right, and then departures off runways 15 left and 15 right. So those are all our primary flows, just to give everybody, again, an idea of what operations may be impacting them depending on which communities that you live in. And then finally, I just wanted to give a quick situational update on what we've been seeing in terms of our aircraft operations. So as I mentioned, we have started to see a bit of initial recovery in our flight volumes. You can see from the graph there that in the most recent third quarter, we had almost 55,000 aircraft operations. And that's compared to just under 30,000 of Q3 of 2020. So an 83% increase since last year, again, with some of those travel restrictions that have been eased. But also you can see Q3 2019, which is pre-COVID, we had almost 122,000 aircraft operations in Q3 of 2019. So still at flight volumes less than half of what we saw pre-COVID, despite some of that initial recovery that we have seen recently. And then on the complaint side, along with the operations, we have seen increase in complaints as well. So you can see in Q3 of 2021, we had around 27,000 complaints from 571 individuals, and that's compared to just under 5,000 complaints from 152 individuals in Q3 of 2020. So again, as operations have been increasing, so too have the complaints. And then for just a final slide, I have similar statistics just broken out on a month-by-month basis. So you can see that looking back, right around May is when we started to see some of that initial recovery in traffic. Back in May, we had about 250 operations per day. And as of the end of the third quarter, we were up to 710 flights per day. So some good month-over-month growth in traffic volumes there, but as we saw on the last slide, still a ways to go compared to what we were at pre-COVID. So I'll pause here just to see if there's any questions on the complaints or any of those flight track or runway slides that I ran through. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands go up or any, oh, there is a hand. Stephanie, please go ahead.
Thank you. Actually, this is more of a statement. I didn't realize until tonight that a departing aircraft uses the opposite number. So I thought, you know, if a plane arrives on 06 left, one that's taking off takes off from 06 left, but that's not the case. So
no, Stephanie, you are correct. That is the case. So if we're arriving and departing on 06 left, as you gave in your example, then both arrivals and departures would be considered operating off of 6 left. The slides, the reason that we showed, for example, arrivals on 6 left and departures off of 24 right, for example, is because those two would overfly the same communities. So if we're arriving on runway 6 left, for example, those arrivals would be flying over the communities to the west of the airport, and the departures off 6 left would be flying over the communities to the east of the airport. So those slides were just designed to show operations that impact the same communities.
Okay, good. I can stick with my original knowledge.
Yes, you're correct.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, I don't see any more questions, so I'll hand it over to Hies, and he'll talk a little more in detail about the complaints, as well as some of the ongoing airfield maintenance activities that have been happening on the airfield.
Thank you very much, Ryan. I'm Hies. I'm with the Noise Management Office at Toronto Pearson. So as Ryan had already indicated, we've seen a rise in flight operations over the last couple of months, and complaints have definitely followed the same trend. We can even say that those complaints are growing quite heavily, a little faster than the operations are. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So when we just compare Q3 2021 to Q3 2020, we've of course seen that there's been approximately a 470% increase in complaints and a 275% increase in the number of individuals submitting those complaints. Of course, more flight operations logically means more complaints. So we've seen more residents submitting complaints in general all over the Greater Toronto Area and a little bit outside of that. But most evident, as you're seeing on the maps on the slide there, are the areas to the north and the south of the airport and just east of the airport. And this is likely related to the airfield construction program that we had this year. That did prompt the use of some more north-south runway operations, as well as departures off of runway 6 right, which of course puts the departing aircraft slightly further south, and then departures off of runway 6 left, as well as of course the return of traffic, leading to an increase in the use of the downwind phase of flight for an arriving aircraft. I don't think there's another complaint slide here, and I see that Paul has his hand up. Paul, go ahead.
Just wondering if there's a breakdown by area of where those complaints are coming from.
So I'm a little ahead of you there, Paul. If you have a look at the chat, there's a link there for the complaints reports in Insightful that break them down monthly by federal riding or city. And I hope that answers the question. If not, let us know. Perfect. Next slide, please. So of course, I just mentioned that we had some north-south operations prompted by some of the airfield maintenance work that happened over the course of the summer and the early fall. So just a quick refresher, Ryan did a great job. So a total of 5 runways at Toronto Pearson with 10 runway ends, 2 roughly north-south and 3 roughly east-west. The work that happened, the key work that happened in 2021 was some threshold work on runway 0523 on the runway 23 end. Phase 1 of that work was completed in October 2021, and phase 2 of that work is scheduled for early 2022. We had a closure of runway 6 left, 24 right, which is one of the 2 southern east-west runways highlighted in yellow on the map to the left. And that closure was prompted due to some taxiway work that was adjacent to the runway, and that was completed also in October 2021. And on the green on the map, the box highlighted on the northwest side of the airfield, Bombardier is constructing a new assembly facility on the airfield that has impacted flight operations on runway 523, which is the northernmost east-west runway. Some of that work is continuing overnight, impacting the availability of runway 523, and that work is ongoing through December through to March 2022. Next slide, please. When runway 523 is unavailable during the nighttime, that of course impacts our preferential runway system. Now, what is our preferential runway system? It is in effect between the hours of midnight and 6:30 a.m. And its main aim is to try and minimize the impact on residential neighborhoods during those nighttime hours by trying to keep the initial phases of flight, the initial departure and the final approach over the biggest industrial areas close to the airport. So that would be around Airport Road to the north and Derry Road to the northwest of the airport. So there's a first and second choice for that preferential runway, and you can see that runway 523 is part of that first and second choice. Now, when 523 is not available, those flight operations will move to the maintenance adjusted runway, which would be runway 6 left, 24 right. Next slide, please. A little preview of what's ahead in 2022, because runway maintenance and construction is a never-ending story, as runway surfaces always need to be regularly maintained because they eventually do degrade due to wear and tear, the freezing and thawing cycle of the weather, and of course over time. Runway 6 left, 24 right is the big project on the docket for next year. The runway is approximately 60 years old, and its surface has degraded to the stage that does require a full reconstruction to enable continued safe operations, which is of course our priority. This reconstruction is slated for 2022, and we do anticipate extensive community impacts. Now, what's next for this is details such as duration and timelines will be confirmed once the contract is awarded in early 2022, and communications will begin in the first quarter of 2022 and will include briefings on the work, timelines, as well as expected community impacts. And you can see a couple of pictures on the right-hand side there of a not so pretty looking runway. Any questions on the airside maintenance piece? Paul, I don't know if that's an old hand or a new hand. Feel free to let us know.
It was an old one, but I'll use the opportunity. While you were speaking additionally, I was trying to find the actual report that would break it down by area, and I wasn't able to. Is there any way you could mail it to me after the session?
Yeah, we'll definitely do, Paul. I'll email you the link. Is there? I think you're mostly going to be interested in Brampton.
That is correct.
Perfect. And if not, Paul, I'm more than happy to set up a call somewhere next week to walk you through the reports as well.
Thank you so much.
Very welcome, Paul. I see George has his hand up as well. George, go ahead. George, we're not hearing anything. If you have any microphone issues, feel free to type your question in the chat. In the interest of time, we'll swing back around and check in with George maybe in the general question period.
Chris, over to you.
Thanks very much, Robin. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Chatlows. I work at NAV Canada in our stakeholder and industry relations group. So happy to be providing you an update today on what's going on our side of things. Next slide, please. So our focus right now is mostly on the ongoing public consultation related to the proposed RNPAR, the required navigation performance authorization required approach procedures, and I'll go into a little bit more of the more detail on each of these. Is just a summary. We have completed a majority of our briefings to elected officials in those areas, and we continue to collect feedback through our online survey form. Just a reminder that that consultation does conclude December 17th, so in just over 2 weeks. So any comments or feedback you have at that point, if you could submit it before then for consideration. And last, I'll provide a couple quick updates on the Industry Noise Management Board. Next slide, please. So a bit of context as to why this change is being initiated now. So in addition to the environmental benefits from RMPAR, so the environmental benefits being from the noise and the emissions side of things, the pandemic has obviously had a quite an impact on the aviation industry, as Gijs and Ryan had showed through some of those numbers. So any changes that we can make that provide some benefit to the industry as a whole, as well as providing those environmental benefits from the noise and the emission standpoints, are definitely seen favorably these days. And as always, the success of the entire industry, and recovery depends on finding innovative solutions to operate in more efficient ways. Next slide, please. So a bit of what it means for communities. So overall, and this is just to clarify, it's not a comprehensive overview of the RMPAR proposal. There are still some sessions that folks can sign up for if you do require more information. But as a whole project overall, we do expect that if the proposed changes are implemented, that up to about 140,000 fewer residents would be overflown by aircraft at noise levels above 60 decibels based on those revised routes that come with the RMP procedures. We also expect that it'll give us a bit more capability on how we manage air traffic over the south side of the airport. So communities like Oakville, Mississauga, and through Toronto, where even though RMP is only being introduced on the north side, 0523, it also provides some benefits on the south and some ability to keep some aircraft higher in the downwinds on the south side of the airport, and thus keeping them a bit quieter. And then finally, based on those changes that are proposed, if they are implemented, based on the shorter routes that aircraft would be expected to fly when flying those approaches, we would expect that over about 10 years, it would result, or I should say prevent, the release of about 178,000 tons of CO2 over that 10-year period. So roughly equivalent to about 43,000 vehicles being removed from the road. Next slide, please. So just a quick summary as to what that looks like. with the approach to runway 05 being shown. And I think if we hit the slide one more time, I think we should see an animation. So if you could just click, there we go. I think so that pops in. So this is the route of the new RMP procedures. So this is the one to runway 05 with aircraft coming from the east joining the approach over Brampton, aircraft coming from the north joining just north of Georgetown, and then aircraft from the west sort of continuing to what they're doing now. Next slide, please. And maybe just click one more time so we can get the RMP. And so this is the sort of mirrored version of that same procedure. So the RMP approach to runway 23 with aircraft from the west again joining over Brampton, and then aircraft from the north sort of cutting in between Bolton and Nobleton and joining that sort of arc as they approach the airport. Next slide. So one of the main goals of the consultation is to ensure that that residents in all these areas in the GTA have the opportunity to learn about the proposed changes and provide their input. Based on that, the consultation itself is designed in accordance with the Airspace Change Communication and Consultation Protocol, which was a document put together a few years ago detailing things like what should be consulted publicly under what situations, so the triggers for doing that, how it should be done, for what durations, and that kind of thing. So sort of defining how the consultation itself works. And so this consultation was designed in accordance with that. Next slide. So as of, and I think if we click one more time, perfect. So as of right now, we're sort of in that that second column there, the consultation period, which runs from November 1st to December the 17th. There have been 8 public information sessions scheduled. 6 of those are complete, with 2 remaining, one next Monday, and the second general information session on Tuesday, December 7th, I believe it is. So if anybody wants a lot more detail about exactly what this proposed change involves, then the session on December 7th would be the ideal time to do so. Following the consultation period concluding on the 17th, we would put together a consultation report detailing all of the feedback that we received during the consultation and put that together into a report sort of targeting end of January, perhaps early February, for that to be publicly available. Any implementation would obviously be subject to the outcome of the consultation itself. But if there were any changes implemented, they would be no earlier than late March, early April of 2022, so in the springtime. And then again, if any changes are implemented, there would be a 180-day post-implementation review. So after 180 days of implementation, we would go back and look at how that implementation went, and was that implementation as it was intended to be. Next slide, please. And click one more time. So I think I think I sort of went over most of this already. We have 6 of the sessions that have already been done, and the 2 remaining on December 6th and the 7th. Next slide, please. Just a quick opportunity if part of that consultation, if you have reviewed the materials, let's say, or attended one of the sessions, just a quick reminder to please fill out the feedback survey, because we're obviously happy to take any any comments and answer questions in forums like this. The survey itself is the best way to ensure that your feedback and comments are captured along with everyone else's. So that we can sort of look at it all together in one source. And next slide, please. And so a couple updates on the Industry Noise Management Board. So the INMB is one part of the overall noise management program. So the last INMB meeting was held on Monday, October 25th, with attendance from the airport, Greater Toronto Airport Authority, NAV Canada, the representatives from the airlines, as well as observers from Transport Canada. So a couple highlights from the meeting included some discussions on improving and adopting, or improving the use, I should say, of continuous descent operations, and both from the air traffic control standpoint and the airline operations standpoint. So trying to do better there and improve and increase the use of continuous descent. Also provided some updates to that membership on these upcoming RMP public consultations, which we're going now. And there was a submission through the community proposal review process that the GTAA runs that was passed on to the INMB for consideration. So this was a proposal that was received to try and provide some noise benefits to some communities. So through an idea that was submitted, it was reviewed by NMB, and it was agreed that the idea showed merit for potential noise mitigation, and that it should be considered fully and incorporated into the group's work plan for further study. So, doing more detailed analysis on the operational side of things, for example, and looking at the feasibility of the proposal in much greater detail. And next slide, please. Oh, and that's what I had for the moment, but happy to take any questions on the NAV Canada presentation. And sorry, I see there's a question from George. I'm just gonna read it to see if it's for NAV Canada. So, okay, I think it is for NAV Canada. So when is there to be another airspace review, I assume? Was supposed to be every 4 years. Last was 2012. Downwind for 24 is diagonally over the city of Toronto, over residential neighborhoods far from the airport. To be fair, that review needs to happen. It's been 9 years. So I'm not familiar with the review that you're referring to that's supposed to happen every 4 years. There are certain, in that airspace change protocol that I mentioned, there are certain triggers that would trigger a public consultation, for example. So if we're proposing any kind of changes to routing or approaches that meet those criteria, then we would do one of the public consultations. Other than that, NAV Canada is continuously reviewing all of our approach and departure procedures to ensure that we're adhering to all of the Transport Canada regulations. So we do that, continuously every single day, looking at whether changes to regulations require us to change those procedures. So we are doing reviews in that sense, but there isn't typically from the NAV Canada side of things any kind of comprehensive airspace review that occurs every 4 years. So another question, I think for me, how is uptake or usage by pilots of the proposed continuous descent? So there is some reports that are available on usage of continuous descent. We just produced an updated one very recently for the third quarter, I believe, of 2021. There was a short period of time where, unfortunately, we were not able to produce those reports during the pandemic because of some resource constraints, but we are still committed to publishing them, and we did produce the one for third quarter 2021 to try and do that as much as we can, and I believe it will be on the NAV Canada website if it's not already, but if it isn't, it will be there very shortly, along with some of the other historical reports. And I think the last question is perhaps more for the GTA. How is air quality monitored in Oakville area near Cornwall and Ford?
Hi, Teresa. If you're speaking to air quality, this is Robin from the Greater Toronto Airports Authority. The GTAA does every 10 years or so undertake an air quality study of the airport impact, and that study actually is limited to about 7.5 kilometers around the airport, because at that point then the particulate matter is too dissipated to be able to track and monitor. So there wouldn't be an air quality assessment undertaken by the GTAA that would extend as far as Oakville.
Great, thanks.
Perfect. Well, thanks very much, everyone, and I'll continue to be here at the end of the presentation if there's any more questions for NAV Canada.
Hi, it's Cynthia Woods. I'm from the Noise Management Office. So I'll just give you a brief update on the Noise Management Action Plan. We do produce biannually updates and post them on our website. So the most recent one was for mid-year 2021, and we'll be producing another year-end one shortly. You may recall that we have a trial going on for Idea 6, the review of the preferential runway system. So we are approaching 2 years of that trial now. We have proposed that it's time to conclude the trial, given that the travel restrictions have eased. We're starting to see traffic return. We've been through a couple of maintenance seasons now, and we still see very high adherence. The school HVAC pilot program. So this was something that we had initiated under the action plan to identify a school within an area around the airport to install HVAC system. So that was, we did support the Peel District School Board for a school in Malton, Marvin Heights Public School. The HVAC has been installed and is now functioning. So that provides a nicer environment for students and employees, as well as the board feels that it also will improve the air quality. We have launched the community proposal review process, and as Chris said, we've had some submissions, and one of which has been accepted by the Industry Noise Management Board for further study. The Quieter Fleet Incentive Program. So we have spoken previously about the success of the A320 series retrofit program. We produce regular reports, and we're currently seeing that 94% of A320 series aircraft operations are performed by retrofitted aircraft. So this, the link here shows you where you can find those reports. So we're now moving into phase 2 of the Quieter Fleet Incentive Program to explore further options for the program. We're currently undertaking a data collection to identify aircraft that are operating at Toronto Pearson by noise certification, known as chapters, and that will help inform development of its phase 2. We're in the process too of developing metrics and working with the industry and community stakeholders for the Fly Quieter and Greener reporting program. So we'll have more to report on that at a future meeting. And we've continued to update our noise web portal, Insightful. We've continued to add reports and update with information such as the effects of COVID. And then just this slide is just a resource for you to see some ways that you can stay in touch and learn more information about noise management. We've got the noise management web pages, and that really is the place to start, where you can learn a lot about the noise management program, and it'll take you to other areas such as our noise advisories. This is where we post information on airside maintenance work with the potential for community impact. There's a link to Insightful. That's the interactive noise web portal. You can go onto there, put in your address, and you'll start to see information that's specific to your area. WebTrack is a flight tracking tool that you can also access through the website. You can look at flights that have operated over a period of time that you select, and it also has the option where you can submit a noise complaint directly from WebTrack. And then there's the section on noise management forums, and that's where you'll find materials from meetings such as this one, including the recording of this meeting that will be posted in the next few days. And then I really encourage people to sign up for our checking in newsletter. This is a monthly community focused e-newsletter, And we use this to provide information on like airport updates, activities, and meeting notices. So it's a really handy way of just staying on top of what's going on at the airport that may affect you or your area. Are there any questions? Okay.
Oh, no. I forgot to lift my hand. Can I jump in?
Of course.
Yeah, definitely.
Please.
Oh, okay, sorry. I downloaded the plan, you know, the 2018 to 2022 plan before this meeting. I didn't really have a chance to go through it, but I just wanted to ask, how successful has it been? Where are you folks in that plan? Because you're talking about all these other things, and some of them sound new, but are you on track with that plan? Because there's a new one coming, right? So anyway, that's my question. Thanks.
Sure. And I encourage you to take a look at the updates that we post. We do give our updates here at the meeting on where we're at most recently. So these items that are listed here are all items that are included in the action plan. So while we are further along in some areas than others, we have made a great deal of progress, especially I would say the Quieter Fleet Incentive Program with the A320 series retrofit program. So that's an achievement, as well as the complete review and an implementation of new noise forums. That was a complete change, and that was again something that we had identified in the action plan. The insightful, providing more information and interactive information to residents. That was again something listed in there. So yes, we're not through the plan yet, and we have more work to do, but we have made quite a bit of progress on what was identified in that original plan.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. So.
All right, then with no further questions on this is where we move into the general part of the meeting and open the floor to our attendees to ask any questions. So please feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat. And like I mentioned, if you could just maybe mention your name and the intersection where you reside, just the intersection, so we can sort of get a sense of what operations impact you. And again, please just include your first name, as we are recording and we'll post this, so we don't need to share that information publicly. Are there any general questions or comments? Really? Going once?
Okay, I'm jumping in again.
Right.
I just want to say that everyone who has spoken tonight and has presented tonight, you've all done a really good job, whether it was that half-hour meeting before or this one, and I have really appreciated it. So thank you.
Well, I didn't specifically call for compliments, but of course they are also, and positive feedback, but that is of course also welcome. Thank you very much, Stephanie. And as Cynthia mentioned, a big core piece of this noise management action plan for the 2018 to 2023 one was in fact making sure that we came up with better, more interactive, more informative ways to work with the community, and certainly your feedback like that demonstrates that we've been able to make some progress on that. So thank you very much. All right, folks. Well, then we'll consider that a wrap. This is the final noise management public meeting for 2021. I would just like to conclude by saying a tremendous thank you and huge round of applause for all my colleagues on this call, from NAV Canada, Chris and Jonathan, to my colleagues from the GTAA. You are all outstanding and have committed to this work and making sure that we are giving our residents the information that they need. So thank you very, very much for that. This has taken many evenings, so we appreciate that. And to all the residents who come, we do appreciate that you come, you probe, you ask questions, and we learn from that and are always continuously improving. So we also benefit tremendously from your participation. So thank you very much. The 2022 Noise Forum schedule is to be determined, but I'll just add that we do anticipate having a sense of the 2022 Airside construction plan towards the end of January or early February. So do watch your calendars or checking in or our website for some updates on the opportunity to attend briefings in relation to that. So in the meanwhile, everybody stay safe, stay well, stay good humored, and we'll look forward to seeing you all in 2022. Over and out.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.